Today we take a review of the results over the last weekend, and then we are also predicting the results for the future games happening this weekend for the Marshall and the Owl on today's show. Welcome to PitchSide with myself, Sean Ryan Radio, the podcast dedicated to grassroots rugby across Canada. And today we are checking out how I did in my predictions from last week. We look into the future, see what's happening this weekend, and who's going to win those matchups from what has unfolded already so far this season. If you're jumping into the action, want to learn more about the Marshall and the Owl and other leagues across Canada, do check out the other episodes on the podcast on Spotify and YouTube, wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching. You get more information about the league structure, how it works, how it operates, and we update every week in terms of any changes that might occur on the episodes as well. So do check that out because things do change quite a lot in the scene here in Ontario and across Canada for grassroots rugby. Now, we'll start off with the Owl. We'll see how we did in terms of the prediction side of things. And we'll start with this first one, the Aurora Barbarians versus Brantford Harlequins. I went with Brantford Harlequins, a stronger side based on last year's stats. They finished second. They were in the final against Guelph. That's kind of where my taking was from last week. But no, Aurora Barbarians showed up. They said, "Look, we're gonna dominate this match, 48-14." So big W for the Aurora Barbarians. They are a top three sides. This definitely was going to be one of those games to be watching at the weekend, as I mentioned last week on the show. But yeah, I predicted this one wrong. I put my hands up. Look, it's the result that is the result. Expected maybe a 7 point win for Brantford, and look, it's an absolute trashing in the grand scheme of things. But look, great job for Aurora Barbarians. I'm 0-1 so far in terms of my predictions for the Owl. Now moving on to the second one, Scarborough versus Guelph. I didn't even write any notes on this result because I think the scoreline speaks for itself. But Guelph 80, Scarborough 0. So it's definitely like Guelph is the top team. That you look at their stats from last year, they had over 500 points from the, I believe, 11 games that they played, which includes the playoffs. So massive amount of points that they scored last year, and I expect them to do just as good this year in terms of the amount of points they can score. Very strong side team. Scarborough will definitely, this is a game that's definitely a David and Goliath matchup for any of the bottom three teams. It's very hard for them to compete against Guelph. And this is just a prime example of what kind of results could happen if you're not prepared for Guelph and their terror. The Toronto Nomads versus the Oshawa Vikings. Now, I was feeling that the Toronto Nomads would have a bit of a more edge to them on this result. But I did go with the Vikings for my predictions. I said the Vikings do have the stronger side, and I am very glad that I went with the Vikings because they won 61-10. So very strong result for the Vikings. They are, they can finish fourth last year, I believe, if they can maybe challenge those top three side teams, so your Aurora Barbarians, the Bradford Harlequins, and the Guelph Goats. They definitely can move into the top three spot. But this result definitely is an impressive one, and they'll be hoping for more of that in the following weeks. Now, in terms of the standings, as the table stands as of right now, Guelph Goats are in first. Aurora Barbarians move into second. Brantford Harlequins go into third. Fourth, then the Oshawa Vikings jump up. Scarborough Aces in fifth, and then the Toronto Nomads in at sixth. So, small few changes in the league, nothing too crazy. But yeah, we're getting into the swing of things. We're heading into round four, and this is kind of, they're nearly at the halfway point of the season. There's 10 games in the season for the Owl, as we know. So the closer you get to that halfway point, the more the more excitement builds up. Who might get relegated if relegation is happening this year? Who might get the Owl Cup at the end of the year? Is Guelph going to be the favourites again? We just don't know. Now, prediction time for the Owl for the Premiership. We got the Oshawa Vikings versus Guelph Goats, and the last time these two teams faced, Guelph had won at the Vikings 55-14. So a big win for Guelph. As I said, they are a powerhouse. They are a dominant side. We got 3 wins under their belt, and expect them to do the exact same this weekend against the Vikings. Expect a big result from them. Vikings definitely, will take that win from last week. and bring it forward and hopefully tighten up the deficit on this matchup against Guelph because you know they can score and they score very, very well. Now, the Brentford Harlequins versus Toronto Nomads. Bradford won on both occasions last year, very, very comfortably. The Nomads are struggling. They feel like they need a boost of talent. They need something to come in. They need some idea, concept, just speed. Maybe it's something to do with tackling. Maybe there's something missing in the squad anyway for them to compete in this league. Um, are they too are they too big for their boots? Those are the questions that kind of come into my mind so far into the season, especially from the way they were last year, the way they are this year. We're seeing very similar tendencies, but they do tend to pick up later on in the season. So maybe we are looking for a bit of excitement later on, but this is definitely going to be an uphill battle for them. I think Brantford win very comfortably at home. And then the Scarborough Aces versus the Aurora Barbarians. Last time these two teams faced. Aurora was at home in this occasion, but won by 100 points against the Aces, or put 100 points on them, which is massive. There's not many occasions where we have 100 points on one side of the table. So the Barbarians have started off very strong. We saw the result at the weekend. I expect them to win away from home in the Aces. Um, but I'm saying 10 here on my notes, but I feel like even just saying out loud that it might be even more. It might be even more. Now, if you are enjoying the podcast, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit the 5-star button on Spotify. Um, that will and review. Take a review. Just say, he's whatever you want to say, if positive, negative, whatever in between. Just helps grow the podcast exposure. Grab more fans for rugby. Maybe if they're from across the pond, wanting to come here to play. They're on Spotify, like, oh God, I want a podcast. Oh, there's this rugby one. Oh, it's talking about Canadian rugby. I've never heard of this, and they jump onto the podcast, want to learn more. So, give it a 5-star. That'd be fantastic. Give a review. Say something nice. That'd be really, really greatly appreciated. And yeah, help me grow rugby in Canada. That's my mission really at the end of the day. Two out of the three predictions correct in the Premiership. So same as last week. So I'm not disappointed, but definitely would have preferred to have the three. But Aurora Barbarians spoiled the party on me. Now in the Owl Championship results. Last week we got 4 out of 4 correct. Are we going to do the same? Now, starting off with the first one, went with Burlington Centres for this matchup against Waterloo, and I got it right. Waterloo 5, Burlington Centres 17. So this is big for Burlington. Three wins already. We talked about it last week that last season they only had 3 wins in the whole tournament, and they've already achieved that goal of being just as good as last year. So one more win, massive improvement. They got 7 more games to go. So they look like a different team than what we saw last year, and I'm absolutely delighted for them. Toronto Scottish versus London St. George. Toronto Scottish take the W. It was the team I went with, 21-10. Toronto Scottish just look like they have a bit more flavour. London still just trying to find their feeling. Um, they did start quite positive last year. This year hasn't been the exact same, unfortunately. So they're going to be hoping for a win in this next fixture. Moving on swiftly to the Kingston Panthers versus the Ottawa Irish. I went with the Ottawa Irish. They are the favourites. They are the team to beat. They were unbelievable last year, undefeated, and they do the exact same here. 22-49 for the Ottawa Irish to win. So I got it right. So big performance there. Kingston Panthers definitely putting the edge on them. Just wasn't enough on the day to topple the Irish. Peterborough Pagans versus the Belleville Bulldogs. I went with Peterborough to get the job done. 29-14. Peterborough get the job done. So it's an important win for Peterborough, getting them into the swing of things. That loss against the Irish, puts them back, 4 or 5 points. So this win is very important to keep their momentum, keep the the challenge on for Kingston Panthers as well, because both those sides are very, very close in competitiveness. And I think any one of them could potentially take that second spot in the East. Now, from my understanding of how the table is standing in the West, and as I said in the previous episode, you can look on the Rugby Ontario website. It should be up to date by the time this episode airs. But From my knowledge, it should be West and East. They do a full table on the thing, on the website. Sorry. So do check that out if you want a bit more detail. They'll have like the nitty-gritty details that you like to hear. But from what I'm seeing on Tuesday, um, this is how the table stands. Burlington Centaurs in a first, Waterloo in second, Toronto Scottish in third, and London St. George in fourth in the West. And then in the East, the Ottawa Irish in first, Peterborough Pagans in second, Kingston Panthers in third, and then Belleville Bulldogs in at fourth in the East. So now it's my favorite time, and it's time to predict the future for the championship. So we got the London St. George versus the Belleville Bulldogs. Both teams have 0 wins under the belt. They're both struggling in these opening fixtures. As I mentioned, they have 10 games in the season, so we're getting closer to the halfway point. This is the time to get a win and put yourself into momentum. I think out of the two teams, based on the fact that London St. George are at home, I think that is the biggest advantage that they have. Belleville will have a lot of travel to do to get down to London St. George, and mightn't have the numbers. I feel like when teams are on the road, they don't tend to have the full team there as an overall idea. So I think it's gonna be London St. George to get the job done. But honestly, both these teams haven't been too impressive so far. And it really could go either way. The Toronto Scottish versus the Kingston Panthers, both teams in a third. Both teams have a win under their belt this season, and both teams are sitting outside of the playoff spots. Now I know we're a bit early. This is week four, round four, for the Owl Championship. There's six more after this weekend. But you got to be thinking, what needs to be done to make sure that I get in the top two spots, and these two teams are well capable of challenging that. And I think they're both going to be wanting a win here. It's going to be quite important, especially from winning against a team in the opposite division. I think the Kingston Panthers do have a bit more of an edge, a bit more juice in the tank. I know they're going to be on the road. I know it is a bit of a journey for them, but I think they have the juice to take the W. Waterloo versus Peterborough Pagans. Both teams sitting in second. Strangely enough, this is the first weekend where we have everybody battling the top spot of the opposite division. Waterloo, both teams have 2 wins under their belts. As I said, eager to get a third win. But it could go either way. I think both teams are very competitive. I think Peterborough, based on last year's stats, were the second best team overall. Very strong in the East. They only lost to the Ottawa Irish, so those things are the defining factors for me in terms of they look like they are the stronger team. They were stronger in the last meeting last season, so I expect them to win on the day, the Pagans to win over Waterloo County. Now, last but not least, Burlington Centaurs versus the Ottawa Irish. As I said, top team versus top team. Absolutely, both are in winning form. Both are very eager to get more wins under their belt. Irish have not lost a match since last year. So since the season started last year, they have not lost a match. So that's very impressive. Burlington, hungry to show that they are a completely different team from last year. And as I said, they've already done some massive achievements already. So they're going to be saying, look, if we can battle this Irish side, we're more than capable of getting promotion if promotion's on the table this year or it's next year, one of the two. Um, but I think they definitely have the edge to push themselves forward. So. But I still feel the Irish, their depth, their strength, the way they dominated in the last year, they haven't been defeated. I think they're more likely to win. And that's who I'm going to go for. But I think it's going to be a competitive match. I don't think they're going to swing away with the win. Now, if you're looking for more information on rugby in Ontario, rugby in Canada, you got to check out my Instagram at Sean_Ryan_radio. You can get more information about the leagues, photos of the players, as well as me and Aaron Guzzola talking about the Premiership, doing predictions, battling it out back to back to see who's the better at predictions. And as you guessed, um, he got one up on me. I went away with one of the results. If you saw it on Instagram, and we'll go through it. We'll go through the results right here for the Premiership. Burlington Centaurs versus Toronto Scottish. Burlington getting the job done. Now, big thing over the weekend, and it was probably the same for the women's. I know it was different from different areas of the province, but there was a lot of rain at the weekend. A lot of games were impacted by the weather, and this weekend might be considered a very accurate weekend for results, or how teams are actually performing. But we're going to base it off the results because that's all you can do. The weather can change. You got to be able to adapt to the weather at the end of the day. But Burlington Centaurs won that game 31-7. I went with Burlington. Um, the weather being the biggest factor is what people said to me when I said on the story, big win for Burlington, Toronto Scottish, they need to step up. The weather being the massive factor. And that's from both sets of fans. Even from Burlington fans, they said the weather was pretty bad down there. But yeah, big win for Burlington. Bradford Harlequins versus Waterloo County, 12-9 to Bradford Harlequins. So tighter than I expected. I felt that the Harlequins might have had a bit more of an edge. They have a bit more depth, I feel, than Waterloo. Not by much though, but a small bit more. But yeah, really, really good results for Waterloo. In terms of keeping it tight. Um, obviously lost the game, but it definitely both teams didn't get the bonus point for the try, so that is going to be a knock-on effect for Bradford Harlequins and Waterloo, because there's a lot of teams that win games and they claim that bonus point for the four tries. Bammy Beach versus London St. George. Bammy Beach 36, London St. George 7. Right, I was right on this one, but I expected a tighter game. I expected London to be a bit more on the edge. They haven't been reaching the mark in these open two fixtures. I know we have a longer season for the men's, 14 games, so we've a good bit to go before we get to the halfway point. But yeah, they need to get a win under their belt as soon as possible because teams are going to be racking up points quite quickly, and you don't want to be left behind. Now, Aurora Barbarians versus Oakville Crusaders. I went with Aurora due to the fact that Oakville were missing 9 players, as I said. Um, but I got it wrong. Their depth is a lot bigger than just those 9 players. Their seconds team stepping up to the plate. Aurora 12, the Oakville Crusaders 27. So that was the one I got wrong at the weekend. Aaron Gazzola got that one right. Um, so that meant he won at the weekend in terms of who was winning. But in terms of point scores, I don't think any of us were right on any of the numbers. So we're equals. We're equals. But yes, I got 3 out of the 4 correct. A lot better than what I did last week in terms of my predictions, in terms of getting the right teams. Um, Pretty happy with that. Pretty happy with that. Big step up from last week. We got 1 out of the 4 in the Premiership. So definitely an interesting stat. Now, standings in the Premiership. You can get the standings of the Premiership in both the Ontario website, Rugby Ontario website, or you can get it on the Marshall Instagram account for the Premiership. So they do focus on the Premiership games. They kind of hype it up and very exciting stuff over there. So do check them out on Instagram. So the standings as of right now, Burlington Centre sit at the top. Bradford Harlequins in its second due to missing that bonus point for the 4 tries. So that's what the difference is right now between the two sides. Bammy Beach in a third, Aurora Barbarians in a fourth, then the Toronto Scottish in fifth. Oakville Crusaders in its sixth, Waterloo in seventh, and then London St. George in at eight. So very, very interesting kind of table. We're seeing a lot of these East Side teams, so your Aurora, Toronto Scottish, and Bammy Beach doing a bit better than the West Side teams as of right now. So that's an important thing, especially from the way things landed last year. Now, it's time for your favorite part, doing the predictions. What do I think? Waterloo versus the Crusaders. Waterloo won last time out uh, in both in both. Sorry, no, 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 no. Sorry, I misspoke. They won the last time these two faced, 64-5. So a big win there, by Waterloo. Crusaders will get their 9 Ontario Blues players back. A lot of depth in the squad. Obviously, they didn't have success over in Vancouver in both games against BC Bears. But will we see the same result this year? I think we're going to see. I'm still waiting on Waterloo to produce a win because they were so good last year, and a lot of it came towards the end of the season for them, and they ended up on top of the table. Very impressive, fantastic in the playoffs. from the results so far, last week now wasn't too bad. They only lost by 3 points, but that's the way things go. But from seeing right now, they'll need to get a win to start convincing fans and players that they are competitive and will get a decent spot in the playoffs. Um, that's going to be their biggest challenge. Crusaders in a similar position, obviously missing players last week. Uh, that's going to be a factor too. But I'm going to go with the Crusaders to win by 24-18. I think it's still going to be close. I just feel like Crusaders have a bit more of an edge as of right now in terms of performance from the first two games. Now, London versus Aurora, another fixture we haven't seen in the regular season since the records from 2017 to today for the regular season again. London will need to get themselves into gear soon. I am a big fan of London. Great team. Really, really, really cool last year to be able to go down and be a part of the squad in some shapes and forms for a few of those days. But they'll need to get themselves into gear because this league is no joke. Um, I know we're still a bit away from the halfway point, but I think this could be an opportunity for them to get the W. Um, but they gotta improve from what's happened so far. I'm still gonna go with Aurora to win by 21-14. I think 7 points it would be considered a better result for London as of right now, for my predictions. But if they do better, they do better. If they do worse, they gotta rethink things. But yeah, that's the way I'm thinking. I think Aurora do have a bit more of an edge, especially after the opening two fixtures. Now to the Scottish versus the Harlequins. Somebody messaged me before as I put up the polls on Instagram, and you can check them out every Monday. We do the polls to see what the public thinks. And this week, somebody messaged me saying this is the atomic bomb versus a crying baby. And I think when we look at the polling results in just a few moments, I think that will make a lot of sense for a few of you guys. But I think Brantford Harlequins have the massive advantage of having Will Kelly back into the squad. I highly rate him as a player. Um, and I think that Brantford will win 38-28. Definitely not writing off Scottish. I still think they're an unpredictable team as of right now, just based on the results that they had. Um, and we'll have to wait and see what this team shapes up to be for the Scottish. Now, Bammy Beach versus the Burlington Centaurs. Both teams will get their players back from the Ontario Blues. Both teams had a win against each other last year, so they're both very competitive. I feel like there's a bit of rivalry happening between these two teams, just from previous years and playoffs and all this sort of stuff. The tension is kind of rising. Like I get excited for this kind of battle, um, but I think based on form and the unpredictability of Bammy Beach, I'm still going to go with Burlington to push a win 25-24. I think there's going to be 1 point in it. I think it's going to be very competitive. I think I think that's the way it's going to go. But I think both teams are fantastic right now. They're doing really well. First and third on the table. So let's have a look at the stuff that you want to hear. That what does the public think? What do they think about these matchups? Who do they think is going to win? 61% said that the Burlington Centers will win against the Bammy Beach. 87% for Bradford Harlequins to win over the Toronto Scottish. 71% for Aurora Barbarians to win over London St. George, and 55% for Oakville Crusaders to win over Waterloo County. So very mixed. We got the 87, which is a very convincing number. I think anything over 80 is very convincing. But when you're looking at your 50s and early 60s, there are numbers where it could go either way. Especially this Oakville Crusaders one against Waterloo, 55%. So it's not very confident that the Crusaders will win. There's a lot of people think that Waterloo have the energy to get themselves into gear. So very interesting results in those prediction polls by the public. But will they be right? That's the question. I am siding with them for all the games in terms of results. So I'm hoping if they're right, I'm right. Um, Now let's dive into the championship of the Marshall. Look at the results. Look at what's happened. And I gotta say, last week didn't do very well. 0 out of 4. Didn't get anything correct. Um, because you got two new teams into the mix. this year. You got the Vikings and Guelph Goats. Very harder to predict. That's what I'm going to blame it on. That's what I'm going to blame it on. And then the other two were just fluke. But no, all jokes aside, I got a better result this week. So starting with Guelph Goats versus Markham Irish, I went with the Guelph Goats. I said that their university team is so good that that's going to trickle down into the grassroots team, and it certainly did, 40-15. So I expect a bit of tighter match. I feel like this Irish side isn't the same Irish side that we're seeing from last year. I know we're only 2 games in, um, but I think that result, I wouldn't have expected them. I would have expected a bit tighter for Markham Irish. But yeah, big win for Guelph. They're definitely putting their stamp on the Marshall. Now, the Niagara Wasps versus Ajax Wanderers. I went with the Ajax Wanderers. I said these are two teams that I seem to kind of go against. We kind of have a bit of a bit of a rivalry. I feel like Niagara is a bit more than Ajax, of course, based on last year. But I feel like I don't tend to go towards Ajax. And this year, I said, or after the first game of the season, I felt like I got to go with Ajax, and they showed up. They showed up. Niagara 17, Ajax Wanderers 54. So I expected a bit of a tighter game. Niagara is hasn't been the same team like looking for him. I thought, very much challenged the game. Um, but as we said, weather could have been a big factor there as well. We know the weather was bad in Burlington, and Niagara isn't too far away, being on the lake and stuff like that. So is that a factor? Was that the factor at the end of the day? Who knows? But yeah, Ajax get the W. And yeah, they've looked impressive. 2 wins under the belt. And it's a good way to start the season. The Oshawa Vikings versus Peterborough Pagans. Both teams, I think, are very good. I underestimated the Vikings coming into the season. We're into the second game. Um, I think they are going to be competitive. I'm not too sure where they're going to line up right now. I think from what I thought before and what I think now are two different things. Um, but I believe that the Peterborough Pagans are the better side, and that's who I went with. And they got the job done. The Vikings 17, the Peterborough Pagans 36. So big win for Peterborough. They are my favourites to win the championship. They are my favourites to get promoted. So this result definitely puts them in the right direction. And then the Toronto Nomads versus the Bytown Blues. This was this was one that, being at home, being at the Nomads, they're struggling for a win. It didn't happen. 12 for the Nomads, 50 for the Bytown Blues. So big win for the Bytown. Definitely putting their shape uh, into gear, getting it right, know what they're doing, and big result because you got to get all those points as well in terms of both the scoring bonus points as well as the points difference. Are big, 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 big factors. Now, the standings in the championship as it stands. Now, it could be wrong with one or two of them due to the fact that I'm doing this on Tuesday. They The Rugby Ontario website does not update it as quickly as I would like. So I'm just basing on the fact that these big scores got the 4 tries, and the difference and stuff like that. So it is a quick calculation. If I'm wrong on one or two, then look, that's just the way it did. But I want to be as accurate as possible. But from my understanding, this is the way the standings are as of right now, and you can probably check out on the Rugby Ontario website when this episode drops. It should be up to date by then. But Ajax Wanderers sit at the top, Guelph RFC or the Guelph Goats in at second, Peterborough Pagans in a third, the Vikings in a fourth, Bytown Blues in a fifth, Markham Irish in at sixth, seventh the Niagara Wasps, and in eighth the Toronto Nomads. So that's how things are shaping up. Now, looking into next week, what are we thinking? What are we thinking? Got to start off with this big one, Bytown versus Ajax. The last year, Ajax won both fixtures against Bytown. Um, and they're on the hunts for a 3-game win streak, so they are going to be very hungry for that. Bytown will be eager to get back into winning ways, especially being at home. Um, they have 1 win under their belt after last weekend. They're heading into a home game. They'll be very, very eager to kind of get that win. And they can be very strong, as we saw from that result, 50 points on the Nomads. So I think I don't think it's going to be a blowout win for either team. I think it'll be a surprise if it is. I'm going to go with Ajax. I put my faith in them now so far. I'm wearing the jersey. as you can imagine if you're watching on YouTube. Um, so I'm gonna say they're gonna win by three, very narrowly. I saw them play last year in Bytown for this match last year. Crazy to even think. Um, and yeah, they put on a performance. So we'll be interested, or I'll be interested, you'll be interested to see how that unfolds at the weekend. Peterborough Pagans versus the Guelph Goats. Both teams in winning four, hoping for a three-game win streak. So both teams are doing fantastic. Guelph has definitely been making an impact since joining the league. You never really know how these teams are going to fare out. Last year we had three additions, if I'm not mistaken, to the league. In terms of teams being in the league and stuff like that. So that really changed up the structure. You couldn't really predict on anything. This year we have two with the Vikings and the Guelphs, of course. So they're making different impacts into the league and definitely shakes things up. But they've been doing good. They've been doing good. Two wins under their belts and they very impressive. But my favorites for the league to win is the Pagans, so I'm going to go with them. I'm going to go for a small margin of five. I think this is definitely going to be one. If Guelph get the win here, they're going to be turning the table a bit upside down in a sense of, just being promoted to possibly getting promoted into the Premiership with the way they're going. So this is kind of one of those little markers, one of these dates that I think is going to be influential to the rest of the season. The Toronto Nomads versus Markham Irish. Nomads looking to get into gear with a win at home. They haven't got a win so far, two games in. Um, and Markham Irish are in the same boat with no wins, but they did look very aggressive in their first game against the Vikings. Definitely could have won that game, but just didn't. But Markham have won last time out comfortably, 29-19, so 10 points difference. Will we get the same result? That is the big question. I will have Markham to win. I feel like they're the better team. They're probably not in the same shape that they were last year, I feel, from the results so far. Um, but I think a win by nine is a decent prediction for Markham to win. Now, last but not least, the Vikings versus Niagara Wasps. Niagara on the hunt for a win. I think if they need to get a win, otherwise they're going to be challenging the Nomads as of right now for that bottom spot. Who's going to get relegated? And they don't want to get relegated, so they'll need to get a win somewhere. They'll need to get a cheeky win. Is this going to be the game? Who knows? But the Vikings have been very impressive since dropping down to the championship. They've been very strong. I think in both games they did impressively well. So I think the Vikings are going to win by 12. Um, yeah, and I just hope that Niagara can pull something for their own sake. But it's going to be an interesting one on that front. Now you guys have predicted. We do the polls on Monday. So if you are on Monday, you get involved in the polls. As I mentioned last week, we've somewhere between 400 and 600 people getting engaged in the post. On those stories, over 1,000 people do look at this post and kind of gauge it for themselves. So we got a lot of interest, people, for these predictions. Starting off with the first one, Peterborough Pagans over Guelph. 62% said that Peterborough are going to win that fixture. 67% think that Markham Irish to win over the Toronto Nomads. 69% for the Oshawa Vikings to win over the Niagara Wasps, and 54% for the Ajax Wanderers to win over Bytown Blues. So pretty close numbers. Not as close as last week. I feel like last week we had those games being very narrow from the public's opinion. The only one that looks a bit more convincing is the Vikings over the Niagara, 69%. As I said, if you're over 80, it's pretty much, it would be an absolute shock to the system if that game doesn't go that way. But 69% is very positive in terms of the public view, as like they are going to win. But the rest are very much up in the air. The 54% is definitely one that people think it could go either way. It's not very convincing. But yeah, that's what the public is thinking. Will they be right? Who knows? Um, Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow, make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening. I'm trying to reach 100 followers on both Spotify and YouTube. We've just reached it collectively, so we're just over the 50 mark roughly on each of them. which I'm really happy about. And I really appreciate people getting involved and getting excited for rugby here in Ontario and across Canada. Um, so if you want to learn more about the scene, as I said, look at me on Instagram at Sean_Ryan_radio. We talk about a lot of things. I do polls. You get involved, more engaged, be a part of the culture because the culture is growing. If you want to help me support Canadian rugby, you can go over to my Ko-fi. It's in the link in the bio. It's also the link in the Instagram, the link pretty much anywhere. That link is going to be there. It'll guide you to a lot of different things, including discount codes for Tight 5 apparel, which do fantastic stuff if you haven't seen some of the videos that I've done with them. Um, you get to, link for the Spotify, link for the YouTube. You get the link for the Ko-fi, as I mentioned, as well as other little things that are very interesting to kind of pick up on knowledge across Ontario. But until the next episode, until next week, and I keep my fingers crossed to make sure my predictions were right. Um, we got all four right in the championship there. We keep our fingers crossed that we do have a very impressive result. I'm aiming for 80% across the board. Did pretty impressive last year. Want to get better at predicting. So, but until then, until the next time, I'm Sean Ryan, and this has been PitchSide.